Hello, Dave here with emergencyprepguy.com. I appreciate you stopping by. I get lots of questions on my YouTube channel about chukar partridges, and I just recently had a guy ask me, he said he wants to get chukar partridges, and there's just not a lot of information out there. And so he asked me if I would do a video on chukar partridges, and so I love those kind of requests. Yeah, I'm happy. So that's what this video is going to be. I'm going to explain the things that I've learned about raising chukar partridges. So let's move over to the hutch where I raise the chukars in, and let's talk about them a little bit. Okay, so hopefully you can see behind me two quail hutches. Those are the slightly red-necked YouTube channel. That's his design. I just copied his design. I did it exactly, well, except for the feeders that I built in it. Pretty much exactly his design. Painted it a little different color than he painted it, but other than that, it's the same hutch. And I really like them. I especially like the sandbox in there for the birds. That way they can get in there and have a dust bath, and they seem to really enjoy it. Plus, they got an area where they can get out of the wind. So let's talk about raising chukar partridges. A lot of people have raised quail before, but they haven't raised chukar partridges. What's the difference? First off, the chukar partridges are a lot more skittish. They're wild birds. When you walk near the quail, when you walk near the hutch, if you're not out there amongst them all the time, they kind of get skittish and they'll all run into the thing sometimes, but not the more I'm out there, then they don't. They just kind of, some more and more of them will stay out there when I'm getting eggs and doing stuff. But the chukars, they'll all run. They're wild birds, and so I tried, maybe if I was around, spent more time with them, maybe that would be different. But again, I was raising them to release in the wild, so I wanted to maintain that wildness in them. And so I gave them their space as much as I could. When I had to get in to to check the water or something, I had to get in the cage, then I would do that. Other than that, I pretty much tried to leave them alone as much as I could. But in these outside cages, there was especially where this side with a solid door here has the sandbox in it, and they can get out of the wind, and it's kind of a private place for them. And so when I'd walk by, the front over here, they'd all be out here looking at the sun, eating, getting water, and then I'd come by and they all run back into this side, which is, the chukars, they need a place to be able to hide. If you have a big enough piece of property, and you built like an outside aviary, because chukars can fly too. One time I was opening this side of the door. I was working on the hutch. I was doing something, and they were all in there, and I had to get in this side of the door for a second. And I opened and I scared them all, and one of them, one or two, I can't remember, flew out of the door on me. I've opened that door a lot of times, never had them fly out. I usually, I'm real careful now, and I kind of stick my hand down in there and let them all run to the other side before I completely open it up. But the two that got out, they were gone, man. They flew, and they flew clear over the fence off into the neighbor's yard somewhere. They flew quite a ways. And so they're, a quail, when they get out, they'll fly 6, 7, 8 feet, and then they'll land, and they're pretty easy to catch. Those chukars, man, they were gone. They were out of there. So if I had a bigger piece of property where I could have a bigger aviary to raise those, where they could actually fly around in it a little bit, I think that would be ideal. But again, they did fine in these. If you're raising them for meat, or even for eggs, I haven't ever kept any of my chukars long enough, and I've never put lights on them, so I've never had the chukars lay eggs. I've always purchased them in the spring as eggs, hatched them, and then let them go towards the end of the summer. This last batch I kept through the winter and let them go in the spring into the wild. But normally, if you leave it to the least with the amount of light that I get here in eastern Idaho, normally if you buy them in the spring and hatch them, normally they'll start laying the next spring, because they're wild birds and they're on a season kind of a thing. The guy from Red Legs Unlimited was telling me that he has them lay eggs a lot earlier than that, but you got to put lights on them. He said they'll lay eggs, all winter long if you have enough light on them for a long enough period of time during the day. I haven't ever tested that out or tried that out, but that is what he was just told me about a month ago. A little bit of history for you on the Chukar partridge. They're not actually native to North or South America, this hemisphere. They come from the Middle East, and but they've adapted really well over here. They're pretty much all over the United States now. People have raised them and released them and let them go. I know here in eastern Idaho, people go hunting for them because they've adapted and they do well, and it's high elevation here, so it's got really cold winters. They do totally fine even though they're from the Middle East. So they handle the cold really, really well. They handle the warm better than the quail because they're from that environment. Okay, I have my incubators down here in a storage room in our basement, so I apologize for the storage boxes everywhere. You can see I've got two incubators running. One is I have two farm innovator incubators. I have one of them that's running right now, and then I have one little giant incubator, and it's the other one that's running. Both both incubators work fine. I think the my little giant holds the temperature better and especially the humidity better than the little giant. I think the reason why the little giant loses the humidity, it is a lot easier to fill. I wish this one held the temperature better, because then I would use it for lockdown, because it's easier to fill water. It's got a little hole here in the side that you just pull that plug out and you can stick and with the turkey, whatever you call that, this thing right here, whatever that's called, I forget. But you can just fill up in that side with water. But I think that those side holes also allow the humidity to escape. Where I live in eastern Idaho, it's super, super dry. If you live in a more humid climate, you might not have that problem with it. So, like a lot of people that live back in like Missouri and different places, they don't even need to worry about humidity, because their normal humidity is, 40-50% all the time, and that's just perfect for the eggs. But here, where it's like desert, it's a constant fight for me. So anyway, when it was on the 23rd, I got these Chukar eggs. You have to keep them when they come in the mail. You need to let them adjust for 12 hours or 24 hours to room temperature, and you need to heat up the incubators, get the incubators to temperature before you put the eggs in the incubator. And so you can see I put them in the incubator on the 24th of March at 5 p.m. It's important to know the time of day. Write that down as well. So on whatever day you do things, you try to do it at 5 p.m. so that you're on time. So out of the 60 eggs that I got, one of them was cracked, so I didn't put that in here. I just gave that one to the chickens. And so there's 19 Chukar eggs in this Farm Innovators, and there's 40 in this little giant incubator. And as you can see here, lockdown, what lockdown is once the first chicks start, or what lockdown is a few days before they're going to start, a few days before they're going to start hatching, you take the egg turners out. I'm going to move all the eggs. I'll take the egg turners out of both, or at least I'll take the egg turners out of this one. I'll move all the eggs from this one over into this one and keep the, so all of the eggs will be in this incubator without the egg turner in there. And I'll fill this up with as much water as it can hold, because I can't open it again until, when you put it into lockdown, you can't open the incubator until at least 48 hours after the first chick hatches. So you got to watch it close so you know when the first chick hatches. The reason that you don't want to open it until at least 48 hours after the first chick hatches is because you'll lose some chicks if there's chicks that have pipped. And in other words, they've cracked the shell and they're starting to try to hatch. If you allow a rush of cold air to come in by opening the incubator, it can shrink wrap them in there and cause them to die, and they won't hatch. And so sometimes I think the longest I've gone after the first chick hatch was like 65 hours or something, or maybe it was getting closer to 70. It was somewhere in there. And because I could see there was enough other eggs that were pipped, I didn't want to lose them. I ended up actually losing the first chick that hatched, I think. But it was kind of a trade-off, because then I had a bunch of other ones that made it, and my hatch rate was better. So you just want to really make sure that you don't open it too soon, so you don't kill some of the chicks. So now my plan here, hatch day will be around the 16th. It might actually start on the 15th. I doubt it, since I put them in at 5 p.m. Probably it'll start, if it starts early, it'll probably be sometime early on the 16th. These chuckers, I plan on raising until I can release them in the wild. You want them to be at least 10 weeks old. And obviously by that time they'll be well feathered out, completely weaned off the heat. They usually, you can wean them off the heat around 5 or 6 weeks old. But you want them to be at least 10 weeks old before you release them into the wild. The older they are when you release them, the better chance they have of making it, within reason. I mean, you don't want to. So I'm probably going to release them around the August 1st or so into the wild. I want them to have a couple of months of good weather before the winter comes, so they can adapt to being live. Where I order these from Red Legs Unlimited, they're wild birds, and he raises them to be released into the wild. That's what most people that have property that want to go hunting on it and so forth, they'll buy eggs from him and raise them and release them and stock their own land so that they can go hunting and so forth. That's their main customers. Chukar Partridges will do totally fine in outdoor quail hutches. As far as the indoor, if you watch some of my videos from a couple of summers ago, I had some quail and chicken hatching time, Kamuka or something like that. I can't remember the brand name, but they're sold by a company called Hatching Time. I had a bunch of those in the garage because I knew it was going to be moving, and I wanted to raise some chickens and some chukar partridges and some quail. And so I raised a bunch of chukar partridges in those indoor cages. I raised them up until they were about 15, 16, 17, somewhere in there, weeks old. And then I took them out to the country just outside of town, and I released them. And I released them a little earlier than I wanted to, mainly because, you know, they're wild birds, and when you have them in those cages like you have in a garage, they would just panic when I would come by, and there was no place for them to hide. And I just felt bad for them because they were a lot more wild than the quail. Because the quail I was raising at the time was also the Cortunix jumbo, you know, and they've been domesticated for a while. But anyway, so I just felt bad every time I would go in there. I'd scare the chukars to death. They'd all try to hide. They couldn't really hide. And so as soon as they got big enough, but as far as their health, they did fine. But as soon as they got big enough to where I felt like they would survive on the wild, I took them out and released them. They weren't big enough to butcher yet. That's the downside to the chukars, is it takes them longer to get to full size. Now, if you're raising chukar partridges for meat, you're going to have a lot more feed invested in them than you would like a jumbo quail, but they're more than twice the size. But they're considered mature at 16 weeks. That's when most people process them, but they'll continue growing for another 10 weeks after that. So it just depends on how big you want them to get before you process them. The one thing that I noticed about raising Cortunix jumbo quail right alongside of chukar partridges, the chukars, there was 20 chukars and 17 jumbo quail in their respective hutches, and the chukars went through. They emptied their 50-pound bag of feed. That's about how much the feeders on both hutches hold. They emptied theirs at least a week, sometimes faster, ahead of the Cortunix quail. So they ate more feed than quail, which makes sense. There's a couple of more of them, and they were bigger. I'm trying to think what else would you want to know about raising chukars. The best thing to feed chukars, especially while they're growing, is the 30% protein game bird. I think the brand I bought was Purina. You can get them at like Cal Ranch or different feed stores. But basically they're a turkey or a wild game bird feed with really high protein while they're growing is what you want to start them on. And then you'll want to lower them down to one of the lower protein game bird feeds. Once they were fully grown, I was only going to keep them for a few more months. I just fed them the normal chicken feed, the same feed that I feed the chickens and the quail once they're adults. So, but probably would be better to switch them or keep them on a game bird mix, but just one with not so much protein. Now I know Slightly Rednecked, he keeps his quail on the high protein stuff all the time. I tried that with my quail, and it seemed like they were molting a lot more often than normal, and they just looked rough. And I switched them to a regular 16%, I think it was, protein after they were adults, and I haven't had that problem. We do have wild chukars in this area in town, chukar partridges. I have no idea how they got there. But anyway, I was hoping a lot of times in the morning they'll come into our yard here. They really like the neighbor's yard over here, I've noticed. But I haven't seen them. I can hear every once in a while. I don't know if you guys have been able to pick it up in the video. Every once in a while I'll hear them off. Sounds like they're a house or two away. I'll hear them talking to each other. But they haven't showed up in the yard yet, so I was hoping to film. Got kind of a limited film schedule today, so I may not have them show up while I'm producing this video. But they're really pretty. I leave feed out for them here, and they come in and you know, they'll feed. Here, I'll show you a clip real quick. I'll show you a clip from a video I did earlier on my YouTube channel where I saw one of them on the neighbor's roof. I don't know if you can hear that or not. I heard some chukar partridges crowing. We've got some wild chukar partridges that live in our neighborhood now. There it goes. Oh, it's up there on the roof. I'm gonna zoom in, let you see. You see that wild chukar partridge on the roof there? Gosh, I just don't know how they got in our neighborhood. But anyway, oh, there he left. So what I've been doing is I've just been right under here, under this half of this was actually the pen that the chukars were raised in. I just under there, so that it stays dry, I've just been pouring a little bit of their feed on the ground. And when the chukars come into the backyard, that's the first place they go. They run under there and they eat some of the feed, and then they've got lots of natural feed now because it's warming up. So they just taste a little bit of that, and then they like to hang out near the chickens. So when I bought my first batch of chukar partridge eggs, I asked the Redlegs Unlimited, I asked them, you know, will they get broody? Will they raise their own young? And he said, probably not in a quail hutch. But he said every once in a while they'll have one escape from their aviary or wherever they keep them at. And he says, pretty soon you'll see little mama walking with a whole bunch of babies following them around. He says they definitely get broody. They're wild birds. They'll have clutches and raise them. And the other thing he told me was that's what people buy them for, is to release into the wild. And they do really well. One other thing that you might find interesting about chukars is the ones that are wild that come around here in the yard. Sometimes I'll have the door open to the chicken coop, you know, so the chickens can roam around the yard, and the chukars will land. They'll walk around the chickens. The chickens don't bother the chukars. The chukars don't bother the chickens. I've even seen the chukars, as they see the chickens going in and out of their run there. I've had the chukars go in the run, and they knew exactly how to come out. They just went in and kind of explored the chicken coop and the chicken run there. They didn't go up into the coop, but in the run. And then they left when they were ready. But my concern was, where they were walking around the chickens, would the chickens pick on them and whatnot. And the chickens haven't bothered them at all. Haven't seen them bother them even once. One funny story that I will tell you is I'd left some feed out for them over near the beehive. Sorry. And I'd left a little pile in a little dish. Actually, I left it in a little dish, I think it was. And we have squirrels around here, and there was a squirrel that found that little stash of feed that I left for the chukars, and he was over there eating them. And the chukars came in and they landed, and they were coming over to try to eat out of that dish, and the squirrel was eating out of it. And I just happened to be looking at him when this happened. The chukar walked right over to the squirrel, and the squirrel reared up on. I'd never have seen a squirrel be aggressive at all in my life. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it myself. But the squirrel raised up on his hind legs and literally just pushed hit the chucker right in the chest, and literally just pushed it. He didn't bite at it or anything like that. He just pushed the chucker away, and the chucker, went 2 or 3 feet away and left the squirrel alone. It was kind of funny. As far as processing a chucker for meat, they're big enough that most people keep the legs. If you've ever processed the jumbo quail, I always keep the legs on the jumbo quail too. But I know some people, when they process them and butcher them, they'll just keep the chest, and they won't really worry about the legs or the wings of the jumbo quail. I don't keep the wings, but I do keep the legs on the jumbo quail. But on the chuckers, you keep the wings, and they're not as big as a chicken, but other than that, you process them. They're about the size, chuckers, when you process them, they're about the size of a Cornish game hen, if that gives you an idea. So you process them like you would a small chicken or a Cornish game hen. I don't know if you can hear, there's a plane now too, but I also hear a bunch of chuckers going off. It's a darn plane. You would have been able to hear the chuckers probably. I don't know if you can hear that, but the plane was still going by, but the chucker's just, sounds like he's just close by over in another yard here, going off. So there he goes. That's a chucker. You might be able to hear him. Okay, well, I hope that was interesting. I appreciate you watching the video all the way to the end. If you like this kind of content, please don't forget to subscribe, especially share it on your social media. That helps more than anything, and liking the video helps with the Google algorithm. So again, appreciate you watching the video. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you in the next video.